Today, or yesterday by the time this video is up, was a pretty eventful day for Halo and Halo Infinite. We got the IGN post where they kind of talked a little bit about one of the new Halo enemies, Jega, who the rest of his name I can't pronounce. And we also got their big blog post kind of responding to all of the player feedback from the second technical test. So without further ado, let's hop into it. So for the IGN post, they talked a lot about Jega and kind of bosses in general in Halo Infinite. I'm not going to go too deep into this one just because the article isn't very long and I think you can kind of read it yourself, or Hidden Xperia already made a video on it yesterday, so just check out his video. He kind of does the whole lore thing a lot better than I do anyways, so you can just go watch his video and get the gist of this article if you don't want to read it yourself. However, here's a picture of Jega. He looks cool. He's a badass. That's basically all we need to say. Now we can hop into the juicy part of this video, which is the technical preview 2 outcomes, and that is 343's big blog post with all their response to the different feedback that they got from the second technical test. And basically there's a lot of juicy information in here, but there are some themes that we'll talk about throughout. One thing I do want to talk about before we get into this post though is that this is the type of transparency that I like seeing from 343 rather than the Inside Infinite posts, which sometimes I think are a little bit fluffy if we're being honest. These posts are straight to the point. They give you the information you want, and sometimes while I don't agree with their answers, they're straightforward. They give you the answers and you don't have to go searching through a huge wall of text to find it. It's basically in bullet points. You can find exactly what they're talking about easily, and you can skip around to different sections if you don't care about different things. This is what I like to see, and I hope that this continues in Halo Infinite. Now with that said, let's just kind of hop into it with the first section talking about accessibility. And so what I'll kind of do is I'll kind of read basically the positive feedback that they got, and then the more mixed feedback that they got, and then I'll kind of touch on some of the main things that they kind of talked about in their responses. So for the positives, we have the friend or foe outline color options. People like that. People also liked full controller and keyboard and mouse remapping, along with being able to change text size across the entire game and having subtitles for multiplayer. These were all positive responses from the community to 343. In the feedback section, we have the desire for an auto sprint option, desire for more color controls in a full colorblind mode, and the desire to customize placement and size of HUD elements. On those topics, I pretty much agree with all of them. Auto sprint, while it's not something I would use, definitely is something I think is a good option to have. Obviously, having more colorblind options is good, and I definitely agree with being able to customize placement and size of the HUD elements. Those are all feedback that I would have given to 343. Now they did say that HUD customization and auto sprint is coming. However, it's going to be some point after launch, and that's going to be a theme throughout this video, is that a lot of the changes that they are making based on our feedback unfortunately aren't going to be coming until after launch, which to me is a huge bummer, though I will say I at least like to see that they are acknowledging the feedback from us in the first place. Moving on to the next section, we have the section about audio, and so in this one for positives, we have weapons sounded powerful and added to the experience. Needler projectiles sounded more glassy and crystal since the last flight. Ambient map sounds and details, especially on fragmentation, were appreciated. People continue to enjoy both menu and multiplayer music, and the musical riffs in-game were a nice touch. I pretty much agree with all those positives. I do think that the Needler was improved from the last flight, and yeah, the rest of the game does sound pretty good. Now for the feedback section, they basically have that the Needler Super Combine explosion sounds good, but it can be too quiet. In here they talk about how they're going to continue to look at it and that it could be a little bit louder, but they're going to take a look at it and see if there's a way for it to stay sounding great but feel more impactful and rewarding for the player using the Needler. I did get shared a good video. It seems like part of it is kind of the fall off. When you're really close to someone, the Super Combine sounds pretty good, but as they get further away, the sound drop off does seem to be pretty drastic. Next up, we have feedback toward the live service portion of the game. So positive, people think the customization is looking great, which I would agree with, although I do still think parts of the system are definitely still a bummer. Not really a fan still of the armor coding system in some cases, and I think it's a big bummer that we can't combine armor cores, at least at launch. I did see on Twitter that they might be looking into that in the future. Now for feedback, many players want to earn per match experience outside of challenges. I think this is a big one. While I like that they had those daily challenges that kind of reset during the flight, at the end of the day, it's kind of emulating an XP system anyways, and I'd rather just gain experience from my games and have the challenges as a bonus on top of it. 343 here said that they are adjusting challenges to fit a more per match experience gain instead of playtime. Another feedback item was that there was concerns around timed double experience boost efficiency. Basically in the fight, if you used an XP booster, the timer would continue to tick down even if you were just sitting in the menu or you were searching for matches. This one to me is pretty straightforward forward, I think that's bad, and it really should only tick down either per game or the timer should only move when you're in a game. 343 did acknowledge this, and it is something that they're going to change, but it's going to be post-launch. And the last piece of feedback in this section here was a desire for a career ranking system in addition to the battle pass. So this would basically be similar to your reach rank, where you could go all the way up to inheritor, your Halo 4 rank where it was SR 130 maybe, and your Halo 5 rank where it was SR 152. I apologize, Halo 4 is kind of like a black hole in my memory. And again, I totally agree. I think we do need a more overarching ranking system besides just every season's battle pass, because as it is, if you finish the battle pass, there's really nothing you're even working for anymore. You don't even have an overarching level that you can continue to work on like you do now in MCC. Unfortunately, here again, they do acknowledge this. However, a full career ranking system a la kind of reach style ranks is coming, but again, post-launch. Next up, we move into the more multiplayer focused things, with our first main focus being the training mode. Here we have positives that the training mode provides a safe place to simply lean back and learn as a beginner, and I totally agree, it is definitely good for that. Also, it received a lot of love from competitive players looking to practice specific things, and I do think that's actually going to be a really key feature in raising the skill ceiling of Halo Infinite players, as you're going to be able to really kind of explore and practice those mechanics in a controlled environment without having to go through custom games or matchmaking or anything like that. People also like the wide array of options that allowed you to change the combat situations, and the last positive was that the bots continue to be intelligent, fun, and challenging. That one I'm a little bit iffy on. I think the bots at times were kind of iffy, but nothing too out there. They didn't bother me too much. For feedback in this section, players wanted to play on fragmentation and to have their friends join them. Here in their response, they talk about how training mode is played locally on your machine, meaning that they don't spin up a server that multiple people can join, but they think that the heart of this feedback is solved via custom games. At launch, you're going to be able to play on big team battle maps with friends and a handful of bots together in the same custom game. I think that's really cool that you're going to be able to play custom games with bots with your friends. That's a pretty cool feature, and you'll be able to mess around or teach a new friend how to play the game or something like that. However, there is one thing that I want to note here. With training mode being played locally on your machine, one thing to consider here is that if you're using the training mode to warm up now for competitive play, when you're playing locally on your machine, it's going to act more like a LAN environment. There's not going to be ping because you're not connecting to a server. However, when you hop into matchmaking or you play in an online tournament or something like that, that's all going to be on a server, and you are going to have ping to that server. So I do think it'll take some getting used to and kind of knowledge for players to know that in the training mode, you are playing locally, whereas obviously outside of the training mode, you are not. So you will have to adjust to that a little bit, as ping does make a pretty big difference in FPS games when it comes to different mechanics or even just simply aiming or shooting your guns. Next section, we have the combat sensor, or more commonly referred to as the radar. Here for the positive, most people appreciated the return to the classic motion tracker settings, and I agree with that, especially for social play. I thought it was a good change to go back to those in the more recent flight, as opposed to that H5 HCS radar that we were using in the first flight. I think it's just a little bit more intuitive for newer players or more casual players, and then with the hindsight knowing that the competitive settings are going to be no radar, I think this is perfect. You have your social settings with the kind of classic radar, and then you have your more hardcore competitive settings, which are going to be no radar. In this section, the feedback was that consistent reports felt that the range felt too small on the radar, especially in big team battle, and then they did just make a note that height indication was present, but many players did not recognize its implementation. I will be honest, I think I was one of them. I'm trying to remember back to the flight without going back to my footage, because if I go back now, I'll be able to notice, but during the flight, I don't remember being able to tell what height people were on based on looking at the radar. That'll definitely be something I need to keep in mind once the game launches, and I'll pay a little bit more attention to that. So for the feedback here, saying that the range felt too small, especially in big team battle, this is something that I 100% agreed with, and it is something that I brought up during my video on the flights. When playing in BTB, it felt that the range of that radar just wasn't enough, and people would kind of pop out on you out of nowhere because the range of the radar was so small. 343 here does confirm that they are going to be increasing the range of the BTB radar from 18 meters to 22 meters. However, it is going to be slightly after launch. The radar in arena though will be staying the same. The next section here was kind of just about the more general arena mode with the maps and the modes. So for the positive, people really liked Behemoth as a map, which I would agree with. It was one of the stronger maps in the flight, and people liked Capture the Flag. Not too much to say there. Capture the Flag is a great Halo game mode, and people also appreciated the return of strongholds, notably PC players who have not experienced it in Halo 5 and found it very enjoyable. I like strongholds in Halo 5 and I thought it was a very solid game mode in Halo Infinite. Here we got some split feedback though, that some players expressed a desire for the flag to kill in one melee, while others appreciated the current tuning. So if you don't remember back in the flight, the flag and the oddball now, which we saw in the Streets gameplay, is now a 2-hit kill instead of a 1-hit kill. This has been the setting for objective game modes for quite some time when it comes to the competitive community. However, in previous Halo games, usually the social settings were still a 1-hit kill. While I think it will take a little bit of getting used to for players used to those social settings, I think this is actually a little bit more intuitive and will make more sense to players over the long term to now have the flag melee and the oddball melee systems line up between social and ranked, as now there won't be any differences. I think it's also pretty intuitive too, because normally a melee is 2 hits to kill, so having the flag be 2 hits to kill or the oddball be 2 hits to kill kind of just intuitively makes sense, so I don't mind them leaving it the way it is. 343 did confirm here that the flag carrier melee will remain 2 hits, but it is being watched and they are open to feedback. And then they kind of just made some notes here in this section. So some players appreciated the flag visibility rules, others were still unsure how it worked, and they're basically just going to continue to watch this one. How it worked, if you're not aware, is when you were carrying the flag, if you were just walking, you weren't spotted in the game, but if you tried to sprint with the flag, then it would put a waypoint over your head to your enemies and it would show that you were spotted. I thought it was pretty well balanced and I kind of liked this trade-off where you could sprint with the flag and go a little bit faster and give away your position, or you could kind of walk with it and try and sneak across the map. And then their other note here was that there was a bug that allowed vehicles to push the flag and that this was disliked by most players. I thought this bug was hilarious, as on something like Behemoth you could literally push the flag across the entire map with the ghost and it was hilarious to do. However, I agree that this is a bug that wouldn't be very beneficial to gameplay in the long term, so I am happy that it was already fixed for launch. Moving on, we have the big team battle section. Here we have some positives. People really liked fragmentation, they also liked the loot caves, and they thought that the Pelican vehicle deliveries looked amazing and kind of added to the experience. People also really liked the wildlife and it was a pleasant surprise for players, and I think we saw that throughout social media. People also here still liked capture the flag, and actually most people enjoyed the rotating flag position that we saw during BTB. Another positive was that Total Control received top marks for being both fun and intense, and people liked that the zone moved after each score as it helped keep gameplay fresh throughout the match. Here though, for feedback, we have spawning more powerful vehicles later in the match meant players had fewer opportunities to use them. This is something I talked about a good amount during my BTB feedback, and that was that in BTB, a lot of times you didn't even get to use the cool powerful vehicles because the game would end before the Pelican drops progressed to that point. I'm actually pretty bummed out here because 343 confirmed that the timed progression BTB timer is not going to be changing. However, they will be adding in more vehicles like the Chopper, the Wraith, etc. So maybe that'll freshen it up a bit, but during the fight, even though I played a ton of BTB, I rarely ever got to use the cool power vehicles like the tank or the Banshee because most of my games ended before they even spawned, or in the few cases they did, I just wasn't able to get one. They did say to make sure to let them know what you think of this match progression when the game launches, so hopefully if players continue to not really like the progression, 343 will consider changing it. They also confirmed that Jeff Steitzer's voice will be returning in BTB, however, it's not going to be ready at launch. Next up, we have the PC section. So for positives here, we have people really liked all the settings and options that we had, and the performance increase from weekend 1 to weekend 2 of the second flight was drastic, and I can attest to that, as I saw huge increases in performance from that first to second weekend. And then for feedback in this section is that a lack of exclusive full screen option was missed by some players, and I was definitely one of those players, as playing PC games in general on PC, I like to have full screen support. Now 343 does go into a whole section here talking about how in this game full screen doesn't actually increase performance, but here's the thing, that isn't the only reason I like to use full screen. Not only is it just a personal preference, it actually just works a lot better with things like shadow play and OBS when you have dedicated full screen as opposed to windowed borderless. So I'm really bummed out that this isn't going to be at launch for a game that is touting this immense PC support. For all the other random options that we're getting, not giving us a full screen option, even though it technically isn't going to increase performances, is an absolute bummer to me, and I hope it's something that we get sooner rather than later, but they did say it will not be something that comes immediately post-launch. The other feedback here was that some players expressed a desire for additional performance optimizations, and I mean that one's just pretty straightforward. Obviously, we want the game to run as good as possible, and 343 does say that improving performance is always a focus of ours, stars. They're happy to say there's a number of performance optimizations that are going to be in the final release that were not available during the previews. Moving on to the next section, we have the sandbox of the technical test, and first they talk about the aiming. So the positive here is that people liked the increase in default sensitivity. However, for feedback, people felt that aiming was difficult on both controller and mouse, along with performance definitely impacting our aim. They talked about how they've adjusted aiming a little bit to help it feel more natural, but also as we get those performance optimization, our aim is obviously going to start to feel a lot better, and we can already feel that to a certain degree in the second weekend. Another thing that they're doing to kind of change the aiming is that they've made minor changes to the cone angle of aim assist on select weapons for launch. So you can kind of see here, you know, they've upped the degree in which this cone angle of aim assist will kind of kick in, and it depends based on certain weapons, along with the shock rifle now having hip magnetism turned on. I'll be honest, I don't fully know what this means, but I think it means that aim assist will kick in a little bit sooner than it was during the flight to kind of make it feel more natural. However, I am not 100% on that. They also have feedback here about how using scroll wheel to change weapons on mouse felt inconsistent and can lead a player to accidentally swapping back to the original weapon. Now I will say I did play a decent amount of the flight on mouse and keyboard. However, I don't use scroll wheels to change weapons, so I didn't actually experience this one, but 343 did acknowledge it and say that they're actively looking closer at this internally. Lastly, they talked a little bit more about the red reticle and why they've removed it in certain instances. Here they confirmed they will be making no changes. They kind of reiterated on one of the main reasons that they made this change was to do with cheating and the anti-cheat system around playing on PC, and they believe that this is one of those small steps that contributes to a larger anti-cheat strategy across the entire game. Weapons like the plasma pistol and the pulse carbine and the energy sword will still have red reticule so that you know when these weapons are ready to track or are locked onto their target. While I didn't personally think it was the end of the world to not have red reticle on PC, I think with crossplay it should probably all be the same. Either PC should get it like console, or console just shouldn't get it either. One of the main reasons I believe this is there are situations, especially on some of the maps like fragmentation, where there is a lot of foliage and you'll be fighting through that foliage. If you're on console, your reticle is going to stay red and you're going to be able to more effectively fight someone through the foliage. Where if you're on PC, whether it's controller or mouse and keyboard, you're not going to have your reticle be able to turn red, so you're not going to have that information and you'll be shooting a little bit more blindly. And so while at the end of the day, PC players probably have more advantages than console players, I don't really think that this needs to be an advantage that console players should have over PC players. In my opinion, it should kind of all be the same, whether we all have red reticle on those weapons or none of us do on those weapons. The next section that we go into is the friend or foe recognition system, which is those player outlines. So here for positives, people like the accessibility and customization options, along with people saying the shield state, so whether you're low shields, no shields, full shields, and overshield readability improved since last flight. However, some felt there was still room for improvement. I definitely agree here that the readability improved twofold. However, I would say in the case of the overshield, it was just a little bit ugly, but the information that it conveyed definitely was very clear. For feedback, some people felt IFF outlines made it too easy to spot and be spotted from far away. Here 343 talks about how they are going to continue monitoring player outline feedback, especially in big team battle post-launch. The next feedback here is that there was a desire for more options, including the ability to turn off the outlines altogether. They basically said that they'd love to provide this option down the line. However, it's something that they'll need to balance and prioritize with their other work, so they'll continue to provide updates on this when they have them. Basically, it'll probably come eventually, but definitely not at launch. Moving on to the next section, we have the weapon balance. For positives here, people thought the overall weapon balance continues to be good, and throwing fusion coils was a fantastic addition to the sandbox. For feedback though, many players expressed concern that the plasma pistol underperformed in most situations. Here they talked about how people at first were very outraged about losing the EMP ability on vehicles, and then eventually this shifted to constructive criticism about its role in the arena and big team battle gameplay loop. 343 here mentions that they noticed it wasn't performing well in its intended role now against Spartans, so they'll be looking at some targeted changes to address its shortcoming against Spartans, which is more of the role of the plasma pistol now instead of an anti-vehicle gun. They're not going to guarantee these these changes will make it by launch, but they are in progress and will make their way to the game soon. Next up, they talked a little bit about Bloom, specifically on the precision weapons, and they said that during the tech test, they had mixed opinions. Some people didn't mind Bloom, others disliked it, with most of the Bloom related talk focusing on the Commando and the Sidekick. Here they basically said that they will not be making any changes to Bloom at launch, however it will be something that will continue to be monitored. However, they found from their data that the Commando was a bit too powerful, so they've nerfed it a bit and it will now take one additional shot to kill someone. As for the Sidekick, they felt that this one's in a good spot, as it's meant to be a sidearm and not a primary utility weapon like the Magnum was in Halo 5, so they won't be making any changes to the Sidekick at launch. Next up, they talked about no-scoping with the sniper, and they basically said that the hipfire inaccuracy is on purpose and is actually in line with previous Halo titles. I haven't gone back and actually tested this in the previous Halos, however just from memory I never felt it was as inaccurate as it was in Halo Infinite, however that is clearly just going off my memory. They like the way that this is balanced, as it makes the sniper rifle fit more of its role as a long range weapon. Right now 343 feels it is intended for hip firing with the sniper to be accurate and consistent within a certain range. However, beyond that range they want players to scope in. They reiterated that this behavior is not new to snipers in Halo, and basically they said that they will not be making any changes here. The next section is about movement. Here we have the positive that overall movement speed and feel continues to be well received. However, for the first feedback, we have a desire for increased physics impulses to help with grenade jumping and other things. So they basically talked about how there's a desire for increased knockback and physic impulses, and that is something that they agree with. The two areas of focus for them on this topic are grenade explosions to allow for grenade jumping, and the gravity hammer to have those cool gravity effects and to give it a more satisfying smash. They talked about how there's just tons of creative plays that Halo players can make when the physics impulses enter the mix, and that's exactly what they want in Halo Infinite. However, they said that they might not get these increases in for launch, but they are working to get them implemented as soon as possible. Next point of feedback was a split feedback, is that some players like no player collision while others would like to return. I'm definitely here in the pool that I would love to see player collision return. Not only does it take away from some of the teamwork like jumping on your teammates, it also takes away from custom games, as there are entire custom games that are completely unplayable without player collision. And this doesn't even get into the more competitive side of the game, where you can do all sorts of weird things without player collision. Like if you're in a gunfight with someone, their teammate can come running through them and swap spots with them really easily during the middle of a gunfight and basically block shots if they do it correctly. You can also have the alternative where you're fighting with someone else and maybe you're about to throw a grenade or a rocket and your teammate runs through the back of you, and now you end up hitting him in the back instead of shooting it at your enemy. And this definitely happened to me during the flight and is really unsatisfying. Obviously none of this happens with player collision because, you know, you just bump into the back of your teammate and it's not an issue, but I do understand that taking away player collision does make it a little bit harder for people to troll, and it also does make it a little bit easier to traverse the map. You aren't going to be bumping into your teammates anymore, and you don't have to worry about running into them when you're trying to get through a doorway or anything like that. I'm still much more on the side of we should get player collision back, but unfortunately 343 is not on that side, and they said player collision will remain absent, but they will continue to monitor it. Next up is this section about equipment. Here we have the positives that people really like the grapple shot and the repulsor, and I would agree, those are definitely my favorite equipment that we got to use. Here in the feedback section, we have that players wanted the drop wall to deploy faster and be more durable. However, 343 talked about how they kind of disagree with buffing it any further right now, and they're confident in its ability to perform when deployed proactively before engagements start, and that's what they want you to do, rather than using it reactively or defensively once an engagement has started, like we would have used a bubble shield in the past. They're going to continue to monitor this, but there will be no changes for the drop wall at launch. The other feedback here is that players felt the threat sensor's radius and duration were underwhelming, and basically the same thing here. They feel the threat sensor is in a good spot, so there are no planned updates for the threat sensor right now, but they will continue to monitor it once the game goes live. Next, moving on to the vehicle section. Positives, people felt overall the vehicles were fun to use, and they liked the addition of location-specific damage, both in art and functionality. In the feedback section here, people felt that the Ghost felt a little too strong in terms of damage output and in vehicle health. However, it was pretty fun to use once you had your hands on one. 343 here said that there are talks of potential nerfs for the Ghost, but there is nothing planned yet. Next up, they talk about feedback for both the Banshee and the Scorpion. Unfortunately, like I mentioned earlier in the video, I really didn't get to use them in BTB, so I don't really have much in the way of my own opinion here. For the Banshee, people didn't feel it was effective enough, with concerns around the Banshee bomb's damage output, ineffectiveness of aerial maneuvers, and total vehicle health. For the Banshee, they're going to increase the durability durability, and improve the Banshee bomb. For the Scorpion, people felt the driving was too difficult and unintuitive, so they're going to tighten up the turn radius a bit to make it feel a little bit better to drive. However, they mentioned that these vehicle changes might not make it into the game at launch. Next up is the UI section. Here the positive is that people liked the clean HUD and the streamlined approach. However, there was feedback that the inability to see the second grenade type in the HUD left some to be disappointed, and I definitely would agree with that, and some people also would like HUD customization options. 343 agrees here that the layout of the player's inventory can be improved and will address both its size and layout in an upcoming release. This will also include persistent visibility into the second grenade type for multiplayer gameplay and a new setting to adjust the inventory layout. And then to pretty much close it out here, they just talked about how muting a player or reporting player took a bit more steps than previous Halos, causing some confusion, so they're going to shore that up a bit. And there was also a lack of in-game messaging when you got banned, so players didn't know how long they were banned for or why, and they're working with their live and service teams to ensure that information is timely and easy to find. And that's pretty much going to do it for this post from 343, talking about all of the feedback from the second technical preview. There was a lot to go through there, so I hope you feel like we did a good job covering everything. Let me know in the comments below which of the feedbacks you still are the most skeptical about, or what changes you still want to be made. For me, I think the thing that I'm most skeptical or disappointed about is just about how many of the things they're on the right track with, as in they've acknowledged our feedback, they want to make the changes that we want to see, however it's all going to come post-launch. I understand the game is in mega crunch right now to get finished, but I won't lie, it's just a bummer to see how many of these things that I would want to see at launch not going to be there. Things like progression and the way experience boosts and all the gameplay related things. It's just a bummer to know at launch we're going to get a game that we know still needs many improvements. Anyways guys, that's gonna do it for the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, you know what to do. Follow me over on Twitch. I stream Tuesdays, Thursdays, Saturdays. You can also follow me over on Twitter or Instagram. And with that said, I'll see you all next time.